Thank you, Chairman Brady and the committee for...
It's Brophy, if you like. You can pronounce my name, too.
Oh, no.
We'll be even.
For providing the opportunity to address you today. I am the program director with the Student PIRGs New Voters Project. The Student PIRGs are the largest student civic engagement program in the country. Our New Voters Project is the oldest and largest effort, nonpartisan, on-the-ground effort to mobilize young voters in the nation. As we speak, right now, 85 organizers are working on 150 college campuses in 24 states, running massive voter registration and mobilization drives that combine on-the-ground and online organizing to ensure that young people turn out on November 4th. Young voter participation is essential to our democracy, and recognizing that in 1972, Americans granted young Americans between the ages of 18 and 21 the ability to vote. Immediately subsequent to that decision, young voter rates actually went on the decline for several decades. But the great news is that in recent elections, young voter turnout is on the rise. And in fact, in 2004, young voter turnout increased by 11%, which was triple the increase rate of the general population. And in 2008, in states where comparison data is available, young voter turnout rates actually doubled. So we're at a very exciting time right now in our nation's history. And as policymakers and local officials and education officials look at these trends, we should be asking ourselves one fundamental question: how can we keep the momentum going? How can we ensure that young people continue to show up in bigger and bigger numbers? And despite the importance of resolving this question, several barriers persist that make it more difficult for young people to show up and cast their ballot at the polls. And what I'm going to spend the next few minutes on of my testimony is identifying where those problem areas are and proposing solutions to those problems. The first are restrictive photo identification laws. Every state in the country requires its citizens to present proof of or swear to residency in order to cast a ballot. Unfortunately, in specific instances, these requirements end up creating, unintentionally, barriers to student voters. The state that has most illustrated this problem is Indiana. During the primaries, a new Indiana law came into effect that actually required students to present either a state-issued or a federal-issued photo ID when they arrived at the polls. The problem with this law was that many students don't actually possess this required identification. And in fact, in just a few hours, a small team of our staff in Indiana documented a dozen cases of students who showed up at the polls to vote on primary day and weren't able to cast a ballot because they lacked the required identification. And these were not surreptitious attempts at voter fraud. These were bright-eyed, bushy-eyed students who showed up very excited to exercise their rights as citizens for the first time. And in fact, at St. Mary's College, which is a sister school to Notre Dame University, two students I talked to really struck a chord. They both volunteer at the local elementary school. They're members of the campus ministry. And they just happened to be born in Illinois and were at St. Mary's for college. And they arrived at the polls armed with identification, with their school ID, with their birth certificate, with a card issued by the local registrar, with their driver's license from Illinois, and they were refused the ability to vote that day. And when I talked to them, really, it was hard to miss the tone of dejection and really disillusionment at the message that they'd been sent that day, which was, they're not welcome in our democracy. So that's voter identification laws. Other issues that have arisen have already been mentioned by the committee, which are restrictive interpretations of state law. In Virginia, there have been recent instances where local registrars have issued warnings to students predicting potential dire consequences for registering to vote where you go to school. And unfortunately, Virginia is not the only place where this has arisen. In fact, in South Carolina, local registrars have provided similar advice to students. In fact, as was reported just today in the press, a local registrar in South Carolina around Furman University tells students that if they are registered if they are included on their parents' tax returns as dependents, that they are not able to vote where they go to school as a blanket policy, which is incorrect information. To prevent a repeat of the Virginia Tech incident and similar incidents across the country, states should withdraw confusing and restrictive guidance for student voters that are subject to gross misinterpretation at the local level and lead to enormous barriers to student voting. And the final challenge to student voters that I'd like to talk about today is inadequate voting infrastructure. As has already been mentioned today, we anticipate very large increases in youth turnout on November 4th. It's very exciting for democracy, and if you just look at the turnout in 2008 in the primaries, you get a sense of how big this might be. In Ohio, for example, all 88 counties in the state had turnouts in the 2008 primaries that were greater than 70% of the turnout in the 2004 general elections. That means that the turnout in the primaries was approaching the turnout in the general elections from the previous cycle, and the national average the historical average is usually only 30%. So if registrars are looking at their numbers and just trying to figure out what resources they should have, if they're trying to figure out how many poll workers they should have, how many ballots they should order, how many voting machines they have, if they just look at the 2004 numbers and increase it by 10 or 20 or 30%, we're worried that we're going to see massive shortages across the country, especially in student-dominated precincts, where I think we'll see even greater increases. So it's absolutely essential for local officials to anticipate these increases. And then finally, under the infrastructure category, really we should see an increase in the number of on-campus polling places that are placed at institutes of higher education across the country. On-campus polling places make it easier for students to vote. They ease the burden on off-campus polling places, and most importantly, they help the universities themselves fulfill the educational mission of the campus by providing students with the ability to have their first lesson in civic education. So in conclusion, again, I'd like to thank the committee for holding this hearing, for looking into this important issue. I'd like to thank Congressman Ellers for standing on campus and registering voters when he was in Michigan. The great news is we're here because young people are voting in bigger and bigger numbers. It's really great for democracy. And the thing that we should do is take a few simple steps to make it even easier for young people to show up at the polls. And by doing so, we'll send a strong message to students who are across the country and here in this room that their vote is not only encouraged, but aggressively advocated for. Thank you very much.
Thank you.